So we have a nice mix of people here, and Lindsay and I can introduce ourselves a bit, but just to give you a little bit of a kind of housekeeping heads up, we may go a little longer than half an hour. If anybody needs to duck out, we will not be offended. The other person who was supposed to be the other half an hour pulled out, wasn't able to join us. I'm not sure what went on, but we can be flexible with our timing. But if you need to head off somewhere, that's fine. Okay, and so we're going to start out by doing a little bit of a presentation about an introduction to the two programs that we're thinking of, and then we're going to get a little bit participatory and fun because we're people, yes, we're being flexible. We're trying to put our money where our mouth is. So then you'll all have things to do. Cool. And if anybody is tweeting, we have our hashtag is bust loose, so feel free. Tweet away. All right. So I am Rachel Ropeik on the left. I'm the manager of public engagement at the Guggenheim, but I'm actually talking about programs from my previous position at the Brooklyn Museum when Lindsay and I worked together. So that is that. Do you want to?
And I'm Lindsay Harris. I'm the Aster Teen Programs Coordinator at the Brooklyn Museum. So I started there in February, and specifically to do some new teen initiatives, including the one that we're going to talk about.
Cool. So I'm going to start. So the program that I am talking about is a program that I did. It was actually in summer 2014, but it's an ongoing program in other places. It's called NYC Haunts, which is run by Global Kids. I see some nodding. Global Kids, if you don't know it, they are awesome. They're an organization that's dedicated to like helping teens become good citizens of the world. They're really cool. And they have a side of what they do that's this online leadership program, which is some digital projects that meet that mission. So NYC Haunts is one of those programs, and they partner with other organizations around the city of New York, libraries, schools, in our case a museum, to help teens develop a location-based mobile game. And it's called NYC Haunts because the idea is that they're finding kind of a ghost story to help tell the story of that neighborhood or that area or that organization. So we partnered with them, and the Brooklyn Museum partnership was actually the first time they had worked with a museum. All of their work before that had been with libraries and with schools. And it was also the first time we were making an indoor game. So all of the previous stuff had been based on kind of GPS location outside, and we were using instead, we weren't using beacons or indoor location stuff actually at the time. We were using just kind of questions that were going to propel people to move around the museum. So it was a group of 15 teens who met. It was a summer program. We met twice a week for about 2.5 hours each day, just 4 weeks. And in that time, they learned this program, Tailblazer, that you can see up there, which was designed by the MIT STEP Lab, which is a free game design app that you don't have to learn a ton of coding. It's kind of drag and drop. You'll see in an upcoming slide. And they used Tailblazer as the platform to design this game to explore an area of the Brooklyn Museum's galleries. So here is a couple of pictures of the process. So the idea behind NYC Haunts as an overall program is that it's really encouraging teens to be the drivers of the entire process. So in the middle there, you can see a group of teens in one of our galleries figuring out they were doing kind of pros and cons about different parts of the museum. It's a really big museum. It's an encyclopedic collection. So they had to figure out which part of the museum they wanted to focus their game in. So that's what they're doing. And then they really did everything from the ground up. So we started out learning about some basics of game design, and they chose where in the museum they wanted to go. Once they did that, you can see on the upper right, I mean, you can't really read the slide, but that's okay because it's just a brainstorming sheet. They're basically coming up with different roles that the player of the game might have, different story ideas. They really created the whole idea. And then on the lower left, you can see that's what the Tailblazer coding interface looks like. So it's blocks that you drag and drop, and you can create your game that way. So that was really an important part of the program, was that the teens really drive it and the adult facilitators just really be there to kind of provide structure and a little bit of guidance, but that the product should really feel like what the teens wanted to create. So this is a couple of screenshots from the game from my phone on the left. So the first one that you see is on the left. That's kind of the intro screen. So the game they decided to create was Helen's Treasures. And Helen was the ghost of a girl. We have a bust in a visible storage part of our museum. That's where they decided to set the game. So as visible storage, there's stuff from all different collection areas. It's all put together in one room. And there's this bust of a girl called Helen. So they decided to create their game to be the story of Helen, and she had forgotten how she died. And so you had to kind of follow clues around the museum, around the visible storage, to help her remember how she died so her spirit could move on and be at peace. So what you see, the other screenshots there are, there's kind of the main screen there with the little red buttons, help me find my treasures. And then there's the picture of Mama, that's kind of one of the clues. So each of the clues, they sent people to a specific area of visible storage. In this case, drawer 47, you can see the 47. And then they provided a clue that really made you kind of look closely at the object to answer the question. And once you entered the question, you can see the last screen is they're remembering a piece of the story. And so you've helped Helen move on. And what they built up to over the course of this 4 weeks, what you see, the picture on the right, is their final iteration. They invited museum staff and some visiting families to actually play test what they had. So this is one of our museum staffers looking for the answer to the clue, and 2 of the teens who participated looking on. So that's a little bit of the kind of overview of NYC Haunts. Mm-hmm.
So you said you didn't use iBeacon. Did you have to use Wi-Fi? Is it Wi-Fi based, or could you download games?
Yeah, so the question is whether the game was Wi-Fi based or whether it was downloadable, and it is downloadable. So you don't need to have Wi-Fi to play these games. You can do it with Wi-Fi, but in this case, we had it downloaded on the devices. You can play it. I can talk to you afterwards about how. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pass the mic to Lindsay.
So the next kind of example to talk about is this new initiative, which is BKM Digital Artisans Feminist project. And like I said, it's a 3-year project. And I've been basically brought on to develop it. So we've just started. It's working from this idea that we are creating a digital teen guide to feminist art. So that was basically coming out of a couple of existing programs that we had in place. One of them was called the Sackler Center Teen Leaders, which was working with a group of teens over 10 weeks to investigate feminism, feminist art in our Sackler Center collection, which has the dinner party, as you see on there, and other rotating exhibitions related to feminism and feminist art. So that in that program, there was a couple of years ago a printable guide that was created by the teens, or rather they provided the content and created by design and editorial. And so the proposal for this new project really came out of this idea of then how to create something that is an interpretive tool that is really teen produced, that they're involved in the process not only of creating the content but also of the design. And so that's basically where we're starting from. And so the first iteration was this summer, and really just working with a group of teens. There were 8 teens. We met for about 6 weeks, and starting from the content. So really investigating feminism, thinking about the art in our collection, art online, and how we can think about ideas of feminism in relation to a lot of different types of art. Thinking about how to translate some of these larger complex ideas around feminism into something that is accessible for other teens. Some of the things that we were working on also was thinking about looking at different readings, looking at different artwork in the collection, doing online research, as well as then exploring different digital tools. And that ranged from having a workshop on our Ask app, to having looking at video tutorials, looking at printable guides, looking at other online interactive web-based guides, and thinking about what are some of those larger ideas that we're really pulling at what this final end product would be. And then we started looking at different activities to get thinking about how to kind of translate these complex ideas around feminism, right? Because that's really the goal in this, of thinking about how to create something that's interactive, fun, and is accessible for other teens. So kind of on your right-hand side, you can see we started out thinking about, okay, how can we create a simple definition for feminism? And so that's where the teens kind of started from there. And then how can we take that definition and translate that into a visual diagram? So thinking about just a collage or illustration. And then how can we scan that and create a digital collage, right, by superimposing their own images within that, meanwhile learning Photoshop. And then how can we take that idea to translate that into an animated GIF, right? And if there's anything that then gets meaning that gets added in that form. And then how can we take that same idea, right, and create a kind of informational video, right? So meanwhile also learning Premiere and thinking about different tools or different skills that they're learning in order to think about, okay, what's going to be the best form for something like this, and what are some of the content areas that are going to be best displayed in different forms. So that kind of led us to just creating some of the initial content and putting that on a Tumblr page. So the URL is down here. You're all welcome to take a look at it later and definitely give some feedback. And this was all youth-driven, right? All the content was created by this group of teens. All of the design decisions on the Tumblr page were created by this group of teens. To use Tumblr was also a decision made by these group of teens. And part of that had to do with that we weren't really focusing too much on the design or what the final thing would be at this point, because it's this larger project that down the line we'll be working with a technologist, we'll be working more with our tech department, we'll be working with additional teens over these 3 years to build something that will be lasting. But this first part was just thinking about, okay, what are some of the ideas, what are some of the main areas that we would want to be included in this, and so that's kind of led us to this Tumblr page. So some of the content areas, I'll just say briefly, was that there's a glossary of artists that they identified as being either feminist artists or artists that whose work kind of looks at feminism. There's a video that they created where they interviewed a bunch of different people around the neighborhood on their relationship to feminism, as well as kind of a question and answer scenario, and linking in current events. And that's something that they saw also as being really unique to this platform. Okay, if we are hosting it on Tumblr for this initial prototype, what are some ways that we can connect with other content that's already out there? And that was something that they were also thinking about. So I'll kind of leave it there, and we'll come back to it.
Now is the fun part. So now we're gonna choose your own adventure style for the rest of the presentation. So we really have a lot of aspects about these programs that we are very happy to talk about and that we are ready to talk about, but we kind of want to know what you are interested in. So like I said at the beginning, we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. We're determined that it was the flexible and loose nature of these programs that was a big part of why they worked. So we're gonna flex around your interests. So do you wanna describe? And I'll pass out stickers.
Sure. So we have, up here we have 6 different categories of different areas of topic that we can kind of delve into on these 2 projects and beyond. And we would love for you all to kind of come up here, grab a sticker, and put a couple of stickers on different areas that you're interested in. And we'll kind of then focus just on 4 of these 6 based on what your interests are.
If you wanna put, say, 3 or 4 stickers out on your topics of choice, go for it.
I feel like busting loose, give me the bread now. I feel like busting loose now. Busting loose in the evening, busting loose can be pleasing. Talk about busting loose, y'all. Busting loose in the meantime, busting loose make you feel fine. Talking about busting loose, y'all. Busting loose to my love Jones, busting loose to each his own. Talking about busting loose, y'all. Busting loose to my love Jones, busting loose to each his own. Give me the bridge, y'all.
Okay, so now give us a moment to reorder our slides based on your feedback. Okay. Oh, I have to reorder our presentation now.
Busting loose, I said, Shala. Come on, y'all said. I said, Shala. Get it,
Okay.
y'all
Should
said.
we do these 4? Let's skip these.
Shala. Come on, y'all said. I said, Shala. Get it, y'all said.
See what our slides look like. Hold on. Sorry I had to unplug, but I have to keep it secret from you what the slides look like. Okay, so we have teen feedback. Okay, and then successes and challenges.
Iteration.
Here, hold on. And then iteration.
Work
Yep.
in progress.
And then work in progress. Excellent. Come on. Okay. We'll just end there. All right. Start from here. Okay. All right. That should, in a moment, return. Okay. Cool. All right. So, number 1 thing that our illustrious crew was interested in hearing was how teen feedback affected the process. You want to start?
Sure. So throughout our process this summer, obviously team feedback is super, super important to this. And from my perspective, moving forward to one of the big things is that they're included in every single process, and that something like this doesn't get made where they aren't actually able to give like the final okay on what the end product will be. So thinking of that in mind, that was something that we were constantly kind of exploring over the summer, where as they were breaking up into their smaller groups working on specific content areas, that they were kind of checking in with each other to kind of present what they were working on and get some of each other's feedback in that process, as well as then kind of the end of our summer, we had a larger kind of informal presentation feedback session where there were adults, but as well as some other teens, friends and family that they invited to kind of give some feedback. And then moving forward, that's also another big component that we're trying to think about how we can use all of this stuff that has been created and get other young people, because that is the primary audience, even though this will, I'm sure, be useful for everyone, but get some other young people involved to really be stakeholders in what this will be and what it'll look like and how it'll feel and all that.
And so for me, it was something that I found a really great lesson in kind of taking my own ego and preferences out of the project, because we really felt like with NYC Haunts, and I'm sure with both of these projects, but speaking for the one I worked on, that we really had to practice what we were preaching. And so if we were setting up this program to be something that was driven by the teens, we had to let go of whatever expected outputs we might have wanted. So like, I thought it would be really cool to do the game we have these period houses. They're really spooky. They're around the corner. I was like, oh, that's perfect for ghost stories. It's not what they picked. Out it goes. We were prepared. We have really great like slides and fun stories to share with all of these. We are only going with the ones that you are most interested in hearing. So I think that was a really important part of the process for us. And there's also, I think, the way we can all sort of extrapolate that into our work with whoever, not just with teens and teen programs, is that, it's sort of like if you are going into a meeting or brainstorming or running a program with a group where you have promised that you are going to listen to them, you have to follow through on that. And it may mean removing our own egos and our own ideas in a way that is not totally comfortable, but for the teens to really have buy-in and for them to feel like they created a story and a game that was what they wanted and what they were interested in, we were sort of listening to them all the way through. So we would ask them every session, did this work for you? Do you want to change something? Do you want to work in different teams? Are you okay staying in this room? Who wants to go to the galleries? And we were really trying to be as responsive and accommodating in taking that feedback and making it change the program. It also meant, by the way, that the adult facilitators stayed after every session and had an extra meeting about like, oh, here's what they said today. What are we going to do the next time to respond to that? So it did mean a little bit of extra behind the scenes administrative work on our end.
Yeah, and just to add to that, kind of constantly checking in with them was super important to that process as well. And I know that I found it like something to like continue to remind myself, right, to kind of continually check in and in every step of what we were doing over the summer.
Cool. Okay, so next up we have successes and challenges. So I think one of the great successful things for me that came out of this kind of flexible structure was the feeling that like we really did see a lot of buy-in and energy from our stakeholders. In this case, it was the teens. But, again, I think this is like you can take lessons from this and apply it to working with whoever you're working with. Like when you really do practice that kind of like you want this, we're going to change it. We've promised you the flexibility. And then when you follow through on that, they were so excited and so invested and wanted their product to come out really well. And, I think we've all been in meetings or run programs or worked with groups of people where you get a kind of like, okay, sure, we can do that. And this was like gung-ho, tons of effort. So that was really, really nice. It also felt nice because even though it was sort of difficult to divorce any expectation of what the output game was going to look like, that kind of made it feel like anything that came out was a success. Like, because you don't know what it's going to look like, there's no template that you're holding it up against. And that also, I think, really felt like a nice feeling so that we were able to get to the end, because the final game was, like we never called it like the final product. It was like, it was the latest iteration. And we got where we got, and that felt successful instead of people having the expectation of like, oh, but we didn't reach a level that we expected starting out. So those are a couple of successes from my end. I will hold off on challenges for a minute.
Yeah, and similarly for Digital Artisans, that was also a success, right? That we were working towards this larger goal and then having something that was a deliverable, right? By having this Tumblr page that felt very, very successful for the teams and felt that there was a lot of work that they put in that could be really shown in this really cool way, right? That they saw. I think also one big success in this process too of how it kind of organically came about with them all kind of working on different parts of this was that they learned a lot from each other and were able to kind of skill share with each other. And that was something that I saw as a huge success in a lot of their feedback, was that they kind of came away with a lot of other skills and interests and ideas that they weren't expecting, which I think is translated in also what we have as a result.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about one of the challenges, which like Lindsay and I have kind of talked about like over and over again, is on a larger level, like what happens to these things? Like we create these digital tools and then where do they go, right? Who uses them? Do they have a life beyond this program? Should they have a life beyond this program? Is it enough to create them and have the skill building and the sharing and the bonding? And I think we have slightly different goals and different answers for these two programs. Like I think for NYC Haunts, it was really very much about that experience and that program. The game is still playable. You know, anyone can download it. Tailblazer is free. I then proceeded to use it in professional development sessions that I ran for lots of other people in the museum. But beyond that, I don't think it was really being used very much. And in our case, that was kind of okay. And we were sort of at peace with that from the start, because it was really about learning skills and bonding and the working together, and especially with Global Kids as our partner organization, the idea of building citizenship and awareness of online skills and digital skills was really kind of the name of the game, and no pun intended. So that was okay on our end, but it's definitely something that I had to figure out how to talk about to other, to the head of my department, to other people in the museum. Like, we're spending all this time and energy doing this program for something that may not have a very long shelf life. And so part of how I had to figure out to talk about it was about the experience. And that was didn't always go over all that well from the beginning. Some people needed some convincing on that one.
Yeah, I think that's always a tension with these type of programs and other places I have worked and other projects like this that I have worked on. It's like, how do you balance the, the learning process and the skills that, are going to be acquired during that process and what this end thing will be. And what I'm excited, I see it as a challenge, but an really exciting challenge is, for this is that there is funding, there is money to work to build something that will be more than just a Tumblr page, that will have some type of utility to it, and something that unfortunately, like something like this, like no one really ever sees this, right? It's just a link to a PDF on the website. And that's not really that useful, right? I mean, it's great as a portfolio thing, but it's not something that can be utilized. So that's really a big, challenge for this project moving forward, and how to, constantly strike that balance, but also, really, as I said, exciting challenge. More challenges. Logistically, there's challenges anytime you work with young people. And, for this, we had funding for 8. So the other thing is that all of our teen programs are paid programs. So that sets how many people we can have involved in it. And so there was funding for 10, but because it's summer and because, teens have, other jobs, or, oh, my dad says I gotta, do this instead, or whatever it is, right? That then we ended up with kind of at the end about 7 of them, which then is, really impacts what you're creating. And so that was a little bit of a challenge, and not really having enough time on my part, kind of being stretched a little too thin to be able to bring in some of those other teens that were really passionate and excited to join it, but unfortunately I wasn't able to kind of bring that in. And yeah, there's probably more challenges, but
and more successes too.
Yeah.
But why don't we move on?
Oh,
Because
actually, one challenge I'll say. One other challenge that kind of looking forward is that I'll be working with a new set of teens again the next time around. So that's also a challenge. Hopefully there'll be one or two that continue on, but yeah, working with kind of new stakeholders each time.
which is kind of, I think, the perfect segue to. Oh, sorry, it's coming later. The work in progress part.
Oh.
More on that in a minute. Sorry, I forgot you wanted to hear about iteration, which is a challenge and an exciting thing. So the iterative thing, it kind of goes along with the teen feedback. Like, we were really dedicated to, I mean, especially like my program, we were talking about game design. We were talking about, I mean, if any of you have been going to any of the design thinking workshops, either here or elsewhere, it's kind of the same idea that it's a cyclical nature. Like, you're planning and creating something, and then you're testing it, and then you're getting some feedback, and you are replanning and recreating and retesting. So that was sort of a built-in structure of what we were doing. And then again, I think we really tried to embody that even in the conversation. So we were taking the feedback from the teens, like we, the facilitators, the adults, were taking the feedback from the teens and trying to replan. So people were saying like, oh no, I'm sick of the coding. Oh, okay, what can we do to try and reinvigorate that interest, or find another job for that person to do, or keep them invested somehow? I will say the joy and the challenge of working with teens is they move very quickly, and they change ideas very quickly, and they come up with new ideas very quickly. And so in order to respond to that, there was, again, I think this constant cycle of like, okay, you came in having had some conversation at school today and you want to do this new thing. How can we work it in? And sometimes that meant replanning what we had in store.
Yeah, and in terms of iteration for digital artisans, it's pretty straightforward that we'll be doing this right, kind of again and again, and each time coming closer and to what this end product will be, but also synthesizing information and bringing in new ideas each time, and how that can also help to help the process in coming up with something that's going to be really, really clear and really, really fun and engaging, and have so much input from so many different people.
Okay, so should go back to the work in progress.
All right.
Which is Lindsay's baby, because she's got this program.
Okay. So work in progress. So it is a work in progress. Like I said, it just getting started, and it's kind of a really amazing opportunity because there's all this money and not very much restrictions on what to do with it, which is a very great place to be. Yeah. And obviously, within the budgets, each one's trying to, project where we're going to be spending the money in each of these 3 years. But there's a lot of flexibility in that. And so that can also pose a lot of challenges, right? Because it means there's a lot of things then to, ahead of us. So right now, kind of coming in the first wave, and I felt it was really important to try to get a lot of the teen feedback first. And so that was kind of why we were running this program over the summer, even though a lot of the other pieces weren't in place. However, moving forward, those other pieces in this next year, that's a lot of what's going to be happening. So one of the big things in this next year is to think about testing and evaluation. So testing in terms of actually, having feedback sessions, for what we have created so far, getting a lot of that feedback. We've started to kind of have some informal things, but really focus more on that. And we've put kind of like a feedback form on the Tumblr page, but is that really going to be the best way to solicit feedback? I'm not sure. We also have money for evaluation, and what does that mean for a program like this, right? That's only 3 years. So thinking both about the learning process and what this end thing will be, right? So how to kind of use that in a way that's going to produce something that will again, be kind of lasting and useful. And then working with more collaborators, right? So like I said, the next summer, there'll be another group of teens coming in. So thinking about how to then plan that, but also working with our own tech department to collaborate on what this is going to be, as well as outside technologists, bringing a web developer. There's some things that we know already, like it will probably be web-based, but aside from that, right, it's really open. So how to bring in the right people for that and the right partnership, because like I said, making sure that the teens are a part of that process throughout, and then what then happens after this year to kind of have more stakeholders, right? So then we've created something that will be a little bit stronger, right? That it will be more resembling this final interactive project, but how can we then share it and get it out there and get a lot of teen feedback in that way, with those people that we're hoping to kind of, use this. So those kind of all the work that hasn't been done yet, and there's a whole bunch of other things obviously in the process that haven't come up yet, but that's kind of what the progress is so far and moving over the next year or two.
So
And
I think
that's it.
we're gonna stop there. So I think it's kind of like, I hope that these are two examples of where thinking about this kind of flexible structure can be helpful, and whether you are, running a department full of people or thinking about increasing teen programs, or, all the different things where you're coming in as a third party, whether you're in an institution or not. I think thinking about like this way of approaching working with stakeholders and kind of taking the inspiration from like how working with teens has been successful into working with whoever you may be working with is kind of something that I know I am trying to do more in my work, although I am not mostly working with teens anymore. But this is kind of my thing that I keep in my mind.
Yeah, and certainly just to go back to, like I said, because it's a work in progress, I'm very much still soliciting a lot of feedback. It's a new kind of thing for me to be working in this way. So I would appreciate all of your feedback, as well as thinking about who we're partnering with and how we're moving forward. Love some ideas from you all as well.
Cool.
Thank you.
So we can stick around if you want to talk individually, but thanks for... Thanks.
We have
Well,
questions.
all right. If we're going to do questions, can we pass the mic around?
Yeah,
Q&A did get voted out, but Q&A got voted out. But I will. Well, maybe now we can be flexible about bringing Q&A back in, because we do have a Q&A slide too. So okay, we can have an informal Q&A. Shoot.
Yeah, so like I said, all of our programs are paid, so they're paid to participate in the program. So it's an application process, because we're lucky enough that because it's the Brooklyn Museum and because it's paid, there's not a whole lot of outreach that needs to happen in order to get interest. So for this summer, there were about 85 applications, and we have a kind of peer interview process that was kind of modified for this, where some other teens in some of our other programs that know the museum very well and have been through this type of interview process were helping to create a group interview. Where we kind of, I went through all the applications and, sorted it down a little bit further, and then brought in about 40 or 50 to come in and do group interviews, and then from there whittled it down. With any group, right, really trying to think about, a cohesive team, trying to find a different skills, right, with amongst those 10, while also having some shared, skills and interests. And with that, kind of having some one or two who were, already really, really familiar with feminism. Feminist art can say everything about all the different waves, all the different, artists in our collection, all of that, to some who were just really kind of like just curious and, not sure how it applies to them, but, we're just really passionate and interested. To some who'd done a lot of coding classes before and had a lot of experience in graphic design, and some who were interested in filmmaking and done some classes in that. So kind of having the range of skill set while also all being available, passionate, and could grow in the program, which is, as a, teen programs coordinator, that's something that I'm interested in all of our programs. That's what we try and bring in, that it's going to be useful for everyone and that they can grow and learn in that process. Yeah.
I mean, I would say it was kind of a similar thing for me. We were trying really hard to have a mix of people who, like, we had a couple who had done a lot of coding before and some who had never done any coding at all. We had some who were, like, really great writers and were interested in the storytelling part of it, and some who felt like they were very weak at writing. Like, one person's feedback was that they felt like their writing skills improved. Like, of all the skills that they felt like they built during this program, the writing skills was the one that she really felt like that improved. So that was really important for us with this program. It was interesting because I was interviewing or getting the applications for the program, but it was also then kind of being reviewed both by me and by the Global Kids staff. And so they knew some of the teens. Like, I think we had one who had done a program with them before, so he was kind of like the voice of experience a little bit, and that was nice to have because he kind of knew the flow of how it would go. And we had some who had applied to other teen programs at the Brooklyn Museum before and had not been chosen. So here was kind of an opportunity for them to come and do something different. Some who were kind of one-offs, like they had never applied before. They heard about it at school or through their online channels. So I was really trying to have just sort of a mix of people and a diverse kind of background, and age was part of that too. Like, we had a lot of seniors in high school apply, and we didn't want it to be all seniors, and so that was a big part of it too.
Yeah, with the age thing as well. I mean, for me, I was really trying to get more skew on the younger, so that they could have the opportunity to be involved all 3 years. That didn't happen as much as I would have liked, just because then it would have been we wouldn't have been able to accomplish as much as we did. So.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not a question, but more furthering that conversation, because it does raise some interesting questions about the content area of our museums and the engagement platforms we're using with teens. And so I found this, we're just down up the street from the Science Museum of Minnesota, and we're a history museum, but we have a lot of game design based platforms, and when we've sort of led with that technology, we've had a hard time recruiting teen participants, because we've got the Science Museum has all these fabulous tech programs that they do, and that kind of goes with their brand. But what we found is that kids who are interested in story, which is that's kind of our forte, is story. That attracted them to the experience, and then they discovered that they had the capacity to do things like game design, and that they enjoyed that technology aspect of it. And I'm just wondering if you kind of found that tension between your content and your platform, or if other organizations have felt that as well.
I mean, I certainly did. I think especially in kind of, this was a grant-funded project through an organization called Hive, which is really great. And they kind of require you to write a proposal of why this is related to your organization. And so we had to talk about that. And we're an art museum, like, that has to still kind of be related to the content and what we do in the art museum. So yeah, that was very much something for us. And part of what I was looking for in the applications was, again, a mix there. Like, some kids who are coming in because they really wanted to do the technology side, and some who were really interested in the art or the storytelling, or spending more time in the museum.
I want to just a follow-up in the recruitment, but could you guys speak just briefly about gender? Because I know from the experience of running teen programs, like technology programs, tend to really attract dominantly male, but the art component tends to skew more female. I'm just curious how you...
Yeah, well, for us specifically, for a feminist
program.
project, I didn't want it to be all women, right? All young girls, and wanting to kind of have a bit of diversity in that. It didn't play out as well as we wanted because there was, in a lot of ways, as what you're talking about, a lot of what was seen was the feminism part and not so much the digital part. And there were a few people who were interested because of the digital aspect and didn't really have any interest in skewing in the way that you're talking about. And I'm curious and hopeful that there will be kind of more of that balance, both in terms of the content of feminism, because that's also what we're trying to do, is to, that's the audience, but also how to kind of infuse some of those different skill sets across gender. I think next summer will be focused more on the tech aspect of this. And so hopefully that's a way to kind of market in a way that may bring some more male students coming in. But yeah.
It's really
tough. Yeah.
I actually, this was something I was like really conscious of, and we got a pretty good split. We had like in our 15, I think it was like 8 and 7 kind of identifying as male and female. But what ended up happening was a lot of the work we did was in small groups because we had a lot of work to do in a very short amount of time. And so there would be like the coding group and the story group and the artwork group. And the artwork group was like, we didn't have to work at balancing the gender. Like there were people on both sides who were interested in that. But we did have like the coding group. There was like a bunch of boys who wanted to do the coding, and the story group was a bunch of girls who wanted to do the story. And we were like, not a thing. So we did have to strike a balance. We did kind of do some like heavy encouraging of like, try out a team that you haven't been a part of yet. So we didn't like totally force it because it was still also kind of voluntary, but that did help. Like we did have, there was
4 different things, not 2.
Yeah, like we did have like there was one. I loved him. He was one student who was like, he was a very small freshman boy, and he started out like really quiet and like very nervous, and he was really into the coding, and he was like, I just kind of want to do my little coding thing. And we kept encouraging people, like every session, it was like, try out something you haven't done before, like who wants to join a different group? And eventually he joined the story team to like help write some of the clues. And then he, like, at the end of that day, we always asked them at the end of the day, like, what was one thing that you had fun doing today? And we had a little Tumblr that we just had them post on, so they didn't have to say it out in the room. And he posted at one point, he was like, I really liked writing the story. So we had some, like, individual moments where that happened, but it was like we had to consciously work against the split.
Would love to.
So something that I struggle with is I'm working with 18 to 21-year-olds primarily. Struggled with at the beginning, how do I orientate them into kind of how the museum works and what the history of museum practices versus just letting them kind of go about this thing organically. And so I'm wondering if you guys can kind of talk about how that process works, or maybe some examples of, or some information that you've given them to work within a model that's not a model.
I mean, that definitely with the NYC Haunts program, we did have to do a bunch of, because some of them had never been to the museum before and were not familiar with the museum at all. And then some of them were very familiar. So we had to do a certain amount of getting everybody kind of to try and even the playing field a little bit. So we did talk in there about things like, you know, so they chose, for example, who the audience for their game was going to be. And then we would keep going back to that when they would say like, oh, yeah, she's going to remember there was like a bloody murder knife. And we were like, you said you wanted this to be for 8-year-olds. So, and there was sort of like the museum version of that too, where, you know, they said at the beginning, like, we really want people to have to like open up the drawers in this visible storage and like really dig deep. And then they would ask these questions that were sort of like, oh, what if we just have somebody like count up the number of things on the shelf? And we would go back and be like, well, you know, like, does that really help anybody explore? So we were kind of guiding with bits of like museum protocol in a more casual way that was kind of all the way throughout. I think on the flip side, in terms of like talking to the museum staff about how this was going to work, I think at the beginning there was this push to like, oh, great, they'll design a tool that we can then have available at our admissions desk for anyone to play. And we had to kind of push back and say, like, we don't know what it's going to look like at the end. It's certainly not going to have like our visual brand that design and graphics have done. So we had to kind of stick up for the looseness to the staff in that way, which thankfully people kind of understood why. And it was, I mean, frankly, it was low stakes enough that nobody cared too much to hold out. But yeah, there was a little bit of like that translation in both directions.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a really good example too of like setting up what their expectations are at the beginning and then like going back to that. And I did some of that as well. And then another thing that we've done a little bit that I think is a good thing that we're going to do and might be useful for you is also bringing some of those people into the same room, you know. So we had a lot of our initial meetings were with some of the curators and with some of interpretive materials, right, department, and with technology department, and like having those people kind of in the room talking about these different elements of the museum helped to kind of create that direct contact and have them, both the teens, understand a little bit of like, okay, what is this framework, right, that we're working in, but then also for those, you know, other stakeholders to understand what the teens are working with, so that hopefully then it's kind of, you know, copacetic relationship as it's moving forward, that then can, yeah, evolve in a way that gets around some of that.
I might just add that, like, they have such high BS meters that, like, there's so much that you can do about being transparent about these larger goals. I mean, it's been many years that I've run teen programs, but I remember talking to them about the funding structure and how they were able to be here and how we could do any of this at scale. And it was like, none of the like wishy-washy, this is really important for the museum, ever landed. I mean, it was just being based. I have to write a report on this at the end of the year so y'all can come back next year. And like that went so much further. So.
Yeah. Cut the BS.
Tips for working with teens: be flexible and cut the BS. Cool. This was okay. Here's our one last slide that we didn't get to. We were going to talk about flexibility, which is true because everybody has been tweeting about cats throughout this entire conference. I feel like we were on trend with our cat slide. The internet, always more cats. All right. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much.